everyone. Good morning. Well, there may be one or two good mornings, good afternoon, and good evening. I appreciate everyone making some time to join us here today for the first in something that I'm very excited about that we're kicking off. This is a 4-part series on getting maximum value out of Netwrix Auditor. And we're going to be spending most of our time today not looking at slides, looking at the product. And I'm joined here by Mark Petley, who's one of our lead customer success engineers. And he is going to be the guy doing all the heavy lifting today. And if we ask nicely, possibly playing some music with those guitars behind him. But we will see. But very excited to have you all here. Again, appreciate you carving time out of your busy days. So we'll jump in and get moving. My name's Mike. I'm the Vice President of Customer Success here at Netwrix. Very pleased with the progress we've made building out a team of great engineers. Mark is one of those. And over the course of this series, you're going to get to meet several other members of the team. It's a very, very strong team. And we're getting really good feedback from our customers that are engaging with them. So definitely something that you want to look to do as we move forward. I think I'm advanced. Do I have control, Mark?
You should have control, Mike, yeah.
All right. You know I'm impatient and I don't do well with waiting for delays. I know it takes a minute for these slides to flip over.
I'll tell you what, let me do it. There you go.
Perfect. So just some quick housekeeping. We are going to do a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, you don't need to wait until the end to ask them. You can type them in the question window that's highlighted there on the slide. We may get to some of them as we're going, but we will certainly get to them at the end, and we'll answer as many as we have time to on the call. And if we don't have time to get to it on the call, on the webinar today, then we will follow up with you and get an answer to you. So appreciate you all if you use the question tab for asking us questions. We can go forward one more. And as we talked about, this is the first of 4 sessions. So we're going to look at the risk assessment capability in Netwrix Auditor today. And then next week, we'll be looking at search and then alerting and then closing with behavior anomalies. And what you'll see on that last session is it's going to tie together a lot of the things from the 3 previous sessions as well. So there's a logic to this progression, and while we're doing it this way, we spend a lot of time with customers and how the product is used and how people are extracting, again, that maximum value from it. So we built this very deliberately to sort of walk you all through best practices for use and some common use cases as well. So I think we're gonna jump into a quick poll and put everyone here to work for just one quick minute with a poll question. And then you can see that's open now. So who's involved in the risk assessment process in your organization? And it's not a pick one, you can pick as many as apply. But if you take a minute to fill that out for us, we would appreciate it. And then we will jump into the focus on the product for the day. So Mark, do you have a feel for what's your prediction on what the top answer is going to be here?
Well, for me, Mike, I know I can only speak to personal experience. Last organisation I worked in, we were fortunate enough to have some information security specialists within the organisation. So if I was answering with that hat on, I'd be very much answer B. But knowing our customer base, I reckon it could be any of them, to be quite honest with you. I think there's a lot of people out there that have to wear a lot of hats. So it wouldn't surprise me if C comes out on top as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So we'll give it another few seconds here, and then we'll close the poll. And I believe the answers are going to show up when we do that. There we go. Yeah, so your second choice was first, it looks like. That's great. So IT manager and sysadmin. And I think as companies grow and more specialization takes hold within an organization, that's when you start to see those security specialist roles. So appreciate you all doing that. Very helpful. And so Mark, I'm gonna hand over to you to jump into the product and walk our customers today through best practices for using the risk assessment.
Cool. Thank you very much, Mike. So brief intro to me. My name is Mark Petley, as Mike said. I'm the customer success engineer for the EMEA and APAC regions. Today we're going to talk about risk assessment or the insight to it that our product can help you with. I'm just launching my my lab here, so give me a moment and I'll bring that over. Tell me if you can see that one all right, Mike?
Perfect, Mark. It's yep.
Excellent. Let's make this something a bit more generic, shall we? So that it actually fills the screen up. So there we go. Like most of you, this is our auditor client on a Netwrix Auditor Lab server that I've got. And in particular today, we're going to talk about this particular box here, risk assessment. So we'll jump straight into that. Now, risk assessment is made up of a number of other elements within our product to fully populate this, so to see something in every section like we have here for the most part. You would need to have access to our Active Directory, SharePoint, Windows Server and Windows File Server modules to get all of this data. And you can see at the moment, in particular, around this data section, I've got some not configured elements. So really quickly, I'm going to show you how easy it is to get some of that. If you were to get a new monitoring plan, you'd come in and you'd set it up like you would any standard monitoring plan. And as soon as that monitoring plan is enabled and got something viable in it, some data, you'll start to see trends and our analysis done on that data in that risk assessment overview. So you can see all I've done here is flicked on the monitoring plan for our file server. In this particular instance, we're going to save that, then just back up a couple and jump back into the risk assessment board. And hopefully, there we go. You can now see that this is now populated with some data, and it would be the same in your environment. So actually getting access to this risk assessment overview is relatively straightforward. So what I'd like to do is kind of dive into some of these as we go through this. And I want to start first and foremost about the thresholds that we hold, or that we have, sorry, for each area. So as you can see here, we've got some empty security groups that compose a security risk to your environment. But one thing that's become apparent is everyone's risk appetite is very, very different. So to that degree, we've actually enabled it so that people can modify the thresholds. Let me just jump back from there for a moment. You can see at the moment, I've got 56% of my security groups of the 73 in my environment are actually empty. Now in my environment, it might be that I've got empty security groups for a reason. There may be some customers out there that have that as well. So you can actually modify these thresholds. And if I was to take this and say, right, that's now going to become 50, and I'm only really concerned if I go over the 51 mark, that then still leaves it in a high state. Well, actually, guys, do you know what? 60 is okay. We can put that in there. And we'll actually see this downgrade from a high to a medium score. So it offers a degree of flexibility within the product down to your own risk appetite within your organization and how you want to approach that risk. So jumping into one of them in a little bit more detail, let's have a look at user accounts that don't expire. Now, from a security best practice, obviously this isn't ideal. An account that never expires its password can create a potential security risk for your environment. If someone compromises that account, because that password never expires, they've always got access to it. Now, with this overview of it, we can actually see that we've got 26 accounts in particular here. And if we actually just double click onto that, we start to get a feel for what we can see and the information that's available to us. Now, in this environment, you can actually see just here, we've separated out our temporary employees. So that might be a contractor, that might be someone that's working for your company offshore. It could be a whole host of things. Now, a temporary employee that may only be with you for 3 months, 6 months, if they've got an account that never expires, they could potentially exploit that after they leave. and actually gain access back into the system, which from a security standpoint isn't a great thing to have. But being able to view this overview, and with just a few clicks, we can actually see where that account is, who's owned it, and as we drill through some of those reports, you can actually figure out exactly what they have and don't have access to. Now, moving on down, if we look at inactive user accounts, these are accounts that haven't been signed into for a set period, but are still enabled in your environment. So for me personally, I know for the environments that I've worked in the past, we would tombstone an account after 90 days, and that would literally move it to an OU ready for deletion at 180 days. These inactive accounts, again, pose a security risk. Yet again, we can modify those thresholds around that, and we can really keep an eye on what inactive user accounts are there and what we might need to control. Now, off the back of that, this is a metric that would potentially change on an almost daily basis as time passes. You could very easily subscribe to this entire overview and set a schedule on that to run on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. So every day when you turn up, straight away in your inbox, you can see all of your inactive users, or your process may be weekly, monthly. You can also filter down each one of those subscriptions into separate areas. So in this particular one, it's users and computers. And from that, you would just get that users and computers section at the top, and that would be presented to you. It may be they go to different people within your organization, or going back to our poll question from earlier, it seems to be that the same people are responsible for most of it. Therefore, it's probably just going to be just as easy to leave that unticked and just have all of them in there. You then simply add your recipient to it. In this case, I'm just going to add that one. Back up here, you can give it a name. We'll just call this security overview for the time being, or risk overview. And we can either attach this report to an email or upload it to a file share. So you can just, go and review that file share as and when you want to. We'll then add that. That's now set up, and that's going to come to me on the schedule that I specified. So that's around those inactive user accounts and the potential risk that they could present, and how you could subscribe to that to know about that on a daily, weekly, monthly schedule. Moving down a little bit here, looking at inactive user account, computer accounts, sorry. If you've got a user account that's inactive within your environment and still enabled, a threat actor could very easily clone that computer account. And if that computer account has access to certain elements within your environment, then if there's a potential there for access to be granted to areas that maybe you don't want them having access to. Now, obviously, there's some constraints around that. So, they'd have to be on your network or in through your Wi-Fi, or potentially have another layer in place through a VPN or something of that nature that they'd have to get through before they'd get that. But it still has potential, which is why we call it out in here. So it's just around good AD housekeeping, making sure your Active Directory infrastructure is kept relatively clean, and stopping any potentials for those particular threat actors to exploit that particular element. I know from my personal experience and in one of my previous guises, for me, I would have loved to have been able to use something like this, because I very much was in a build space some time ago. So inactive computer accounts within an Active Directory structure could always cause a little bit of a problem when we're trying to re-image and redeploy devices to the estate, particularly when you're redeploying the same account, getting duplicate SIDs and things like that, and creating trust relationships problems with Active Directory. Having something like this, being able to pinpoint that information relatively quickly through, just a simple click of a button, and seeing all of these inactive computer accounts that haven't been logged onto for whatever period you've got it set as, you know, in here we've actually got it set at 35 days. So these are computers that haven't been logged onto or haven't been seen on the network for 35 days. You could change that if you wanted to. We could push that out to 60. And then it constrains it to any ones at 60. You know, if your personal preference in your estate is 90, then 90. And we can actually see some of these, you know, never even logged on. So clearing those up would just be of benefit. Sorry, I'm just referring to my notes. So the next point that I wanted to touch on was one I know from my security team in the previous guise and my own personal activities in a long time ago was quite key, and it's who's got admin permission in our estate. You know, there's quite an active ethos, if you will, in amongst security personnel to restrict admin permissions across their estate and ensure that those admin permissions are only given to the right people. Now, some of those people might be, you know, your top end admins, but you always find one or two that manage to somehow sneak in there and get these elevated permissions that they potentially don't need. And it may give them access to something that you don't want them seeing. So to that end, you can see here all user accounts who have those permissions. And again, like with our other sections, you can sort of come along and go, well, actually, 59% of my estate, yeah, they should have a. You can then modify those thresholds so this report looks green. I know a customer I was speaking to recently had opened this report for the first time. They went, there's too much red in there. I showed them that. I explained to them about how it's supposed to be to their risk appetite. They've worked with those thresholds a little bit, and you know, they've got something that's a lot more palatable for their security officers and themselves to work through and work off of. Now, with those permissions, obviously those elevated admin permissions, it can be a challenge, but we can drill right down and we can see, here's our group, here's our admin group, and here's all of the people in that group. We can even see which accounts are enabled, which ones are disabled. And from there, it can give you a point to work off of. And that's the key here. It's about that visibility. Let's, for argument's sake, actually, I know this person doesn't need access. I can now go to Active Directory, go straight to the group in question, which is this one, and we can remove him and know that that will now, how that will positively impact our risk profile when it comes to that overview. You can actually see that it separates out between groups as well. So we saw the administrators group. This is now a domain admins group. Now it might be that your administrators group, you allow that to have sprawl in it and people are allowed access to it, and you want to constrain the access to the domain admins group. This way you could really drill down into it and actually just look at the domain admins group through this particular report. If we then view that, and now we only see the domain admins, which is for that particular OU. Like the last one, you know, you can actually file this one off and save this report to any format that you want, which then might be ingested by another program, and you could then report on it through your SIEM or whatever else is you have out there. It's at this point I'd like to ask another question or put another poll up. With this particular one, we're going to ask the question around which risk controls for you would be most critical to your organization. There's, again, it's multiple choice like the last one, and this goes around excessive user rights, data governance issues, so ownership of data, vulnerable servers and their applications, and unsecured user accounts. For me, again, harping back to some of my previous incarnations, shall we say, I know the big one for me was vulnerable servers as a server admin that had, weren't patched or weren't quite up to date. Mike, what about yourself? Have you had anything of that nature that really springs to mind? I think he's still muted.
But I expect excessive access rights to be I think it might be the top. I'm a little biased. I've worked around solutions that are designed to help address that for quite some time now, and I think that remains one of the central challenges. But let's see. We'll see which one of us is right.
Okay, thank you. So we'll give you another few seconds if I could encourage you just to answer that poll. Give us some insight into where you're at as well. Looks like Maria's sharing the poll results. Greatly, I can't see them at my end. Mike, can you share with me which ones did come out on top?
Yeah, so vulnerable servers and applications, 72%, the top choice, and excessive access rights were 70%. So I tip my virtual cap to you for calling that one out.
Thanks. That's great, actually, because we'll come on to that in a minute and how this risk assessment overview can actually help you identify some of those vulnerable servers in particular. So moving on down this list a bit, we've obviously covered the users and computers piece. We've touched on a few of these, and each one's got its own particular nuance that it might cover. Our explanations in this detail pane are generally pretty good, and our default levels that we put them at are there or thereabouts to best practice when we polled a number of security personnel. But as I said earlier, those threshold values, each company is always going to be different. So feel free to modify those, tweak them up, tweak them down. You put them where you feel comfortable as an organization. So as we come down, one of the ones that I switched on earlier was around data. And this particular one plays into our Windows file server module, if you will. So this is about access to those files within shares. And in this particular instance, we're talking about the everyone group being granted a level of permission to those folders. Now, best practice generally stipulates, everyone will be on the share, but it won't necessarily be on the NTFS permission. And by putting that everyone, yes, it's easy to be able to just put everyone on there and let it inherit from the root directory, but it does open you up to information spread, shall we say, that maybe sometimes companies don't want to have available to everyone in the organization. So it's literally, again, as simple as the other ones. You could come into this, or you could see the report in your inbox when you've got your report on a daily basis. You can view it. And this is going to take a moment to load because there's a little bit in there. But at the top, you can see I'm looking at some of the archive data that I have. You can specify this down to a particular UNC path, so a very particular share that you want to monitor or you want to look at if it's being reported against. You can also specify the user group that in question. So at the moment, you can see this has got everyone and the authenticated users group in there. You can also look at the permission types, so basic or advanced permissions types. You can also pick, if you wanted to target an individual element or an individual item, you could target that from your monitoring plan in here and actually pick out just one of them. Simply by doing that, I'm going to leave it on all because I don't want to rerun the report. You can then look at the folders or the folders and files. You can hide anything that's got inherited permissions. And what we're looking at here is the effective access. So it's the combination of that share permission and the file permission. And we can see as we scroll down that This particular group has got access to the file shared data admin. It's got full control permissions, and those have been directly granted to it.
Then adjust that accordingly and put the permissions onto the share and or the file that you want to have in play. Those combined permissions make life obviously a little bit easier because it's generally the least restrictive that's going to come into play.
Sorry, I think you might have lost me there. Can you hear me okay, Mike?
Yeah, that was fine. No worries.
No
Okay. Sorry, my headset's having a bit of a funny 5 minutes. Let me just kill that. So I'm just rerunning that report on just the folders and the files permissions, and you can see it's not found anything in there, which is just typical of doing any presentation like this. So that's a rough overview of our files and folders accessed by everyone. So what I wanted to come to with regards to the poll that we did just now, everyone mentioned, or at least it came out on top, that vulnerable servers and applications was one of the key elements. So servers with, if I can scroll down, come on. Servers with an inappropriate operating system. You can see in this environment, I've got none because I've only got one server in here. Now, this one has another element that you can manipulate or use. And you can see here that we've actually got the internal version numbers for Windows. And I think this is, if I recall correctly, 2008 through to 2016 versions of Windows Server. So what this is doing is it's going away and it's looking at your server operating systems and the information collected through our collectors in the Windows Server module and analyzing what version of the operating system is currently on that device. To that extent, you can then put a risk indicator against it. So let's say you were doing a server migration of some sort across a server farm. You could actually use this to track where the potential gaps are that need to be plugged at the earliest stages. So by looking at what your earliest operating system version is and gradually riding that up so that you get to a point where everything is then covered. For me personally, I know when I was a server admin, having to migrate sort of 300 to 400 servers, this sort of thing would have been, you know, really, really good for me, purely on the premise that knowing that and being able to report on it on an almost, you know, a real-time basis would allow for me to report up to my management team at the time where we were on quite a flexible basis moving forward and let them know exactly where we needed to be and what we needed to target go after that particular point. Again, in the infrastructure space, we can go down to the antivirus software and we can customize those risk indicators. You can see by default, we only put Windows Defender, but you may have particular virus, antivirus solution in your estate. You know, there's a lot of people out there that use Norton Antivirus, McAfee, all of these different products. And in doing so, you could actually put those in there, then leverage this risk assessment overview to know where you've got potential gaps. And again, you know, you can subscribe to that, you can export this data, and you can modify those thresholds as you're gradually moving through. The other one, as this list grows, which it inevitably will, you can filter this down relatively quickly just by doing something along those lines, whereby you can now see everything that's got the word group in it. And, you know, you can really target elements to get visibility there. So let me get rid of that. Get rid of that. So those are the ones I wanted to touch on just quickly. I don't have another poll. The three here that you can see around site collections, anonymous access, and site collections with broken inheritance, they're all in our SharePoint monitoring plan, and it can enable you to look at your on-prem SharePoint and, you know, get some of that information that maybe is not readily available or to hand straight away. And you can really dig down into that. It gives you a target to go and fix something, and it just allows for you to gain that visibility. You know, that's what Netwrix is all about. It's about that visibility into your platform or into your environment, and identifying some of those gaps that you might have and lowering your risk level or your organization's risk level to an acceptable level, whether that be for compliance, whether that be for internal audits or an audit of some sort. And, you know, that's really the goal of this overview, to try and look at that and from a high level, and then give you the information to drill down into the other areas.
Mark, I think that was great. I appreciate you doing that. I think you've stepped through, I think, certainly everything that we talked about prior to this. I think that was a very helpful overview. There are a good number of questions coming in. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to dive into those. So you okay if we do that now?
Yeah, just briefly then, if we're going to jump into questions,
Yep.
I'd just like to point out, obviously, before we come off of this, something that could be very handy for everyone that's on the call with us today. Our Visibility Academy, it's a great resource for how-tos and best practices, and it could really help you understand the product. There's some elements in there around risk assessment, in case you haven't quite caught everything today. Obviously, today's being recorded, so feel free to go back and look at some of the elements that I've spoken about. But make sure as well that, don't ever forget, reach out to us in customer success if you've got a problem. Reach out to your account managers, reach out to our support teams. You know, we've got a 97% success rating with our support teams. They're there for you guys that own the product to go and question if you need to. We're all here to help. So if you do have questions, make sure that you reach out. Now, back to your point, Mike, more than happy to have a chat about some questions.
And maybe while we're doing that, Mark, if you want to go and switch back to the slides, I know we have that one slide with the useful links that we'll put up.
Yes, we did.
Look at that.
Let me just get rid of this.
So thanks to everyone that did submit a question. We're gonna do our best here. You know, I'm gonna start. I'm just gonna make a reference to one of you posted earlier, running an older version of the product, version 7.7. and looking for some help on documentation and upgrading with another question or two. I'm going to ask someone to reach out to you directly to assist with that. So we did see it, and stay tuned. We had one question, Mark. Gentleman has a large number of service accounts that have their passwords set to never expire, but they don't have any extra privileges besides to their own mailbox. And he was looking to exclude them from that report. Is there a way to do that?
Yes, we can actually exclude them from collection in its entirety. What we would look to do is put that particular file, those accounts into one of our omit files. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly which omit file it would be, but under our knowledge base, which you can see on the screen at the moment, so kb.netwrix.com. If you just search for omit files, there will actually be an omit file for how to stop that item being shown in your reports, and it will take you through step by step on how to achieve that.
Excellent, excellent. We can have someone touch base with you as well, Patrick, to help through that. Another question I think you may have touched on, but just in case, can you adjust the number of days that defines inactive computer or user accounts? So I think
yes, you can. Let me see if I can bring this back up. Can you see that okay, Mike?
Yep, coming back, yep.
Cool. So if we have a look at the inactive users here and just look at the report, we've actually got the inactive days right here. So we can change this in the report to 90 days and apply those filters. That report will now show only accounts that are inactive for 90 days. So that allows you to flex that to your own requirements in your estate. I know by default, I've used 90 days in my AD infrastructure in the past as my level of inactivity before an account gets tombstoned or deemed inactive to be tombstoned at a later date. But that's there exactly for that reason, to enable you to flex up and understand at your given period what your position looks like.
Excellent, thank you. I had another one, I think it's a good question. How often does Netwrix Auditor update the information that we're looking at in the risk assessment tile there?
But, do you know what? That is a really good question because I don't know the answer to it and I would need to go and find that out. So whoever's asked that, thank you very much. I'll find it out and I'll personally be in touch.
That makes it a great question.
Yes.
When we get some, so excellent. Another good question, can we add custom admin groups to the reports?
No, it's very static at the moment. You will see through the reports, so custom groups, which one was it? This is going to take what is in your domain admins by a relatively normal standard. You can update the member path and type to include other OUs if you have groups in there. So you could report on it, but it won't show in the overall report on the home screen.
Okay, so we'll kind of also take that a little bit as a feature request.
Yep.
And relay that over to the product team. So thank you for putting that along. I think you touched on this in the beginning in terms of what needs to be enabled in the auditor to light up this risk assessment overview. Could you review that again? There was a question about what does auditor need to consume for this to work?
So the three modules that you would need, the four modules that you would need. This top section, which is users and computers, predominantly focuses on Active Directory. So you would be looking to have a monitoring plan that is looking at your Active Directory structure. Something that might look similar to that. You can see that mine say take action and all sorts of funny things. That's because it's my lab and I've probably broken it more than once. But you would need to have an Active Directory one to get that top section around users and permissions. The next section around permissions, that's going to be through Windows Server. These bottom three will be through SharePoint. So SharePoint, our on-premise SharePoint monitoring. This section around data and potentially harmful files and things of that nature, that will be through File Server, so Windows File Server. And then again, on the infrastructure piece, that will be around Windows Server again as well. So in total, if you wanted to see this fully populated, you'd be looking at Active Directory, you'd be looking at Windows Server, you'd be looking at Windows File Server and SharePoint modules to be installed and actively collecting data.
And to clarify on that one point, because there was another question mark, SharePoint on-prem only at this stage, correct?
I believe that is correct, yes.
We are getting to the end of the questions here. What defines the proper name of the AV software? How does it ingest that name? Is it something that's configurable, or are we grabbing it from someplace?
So we're going to be grabbing that from, if I recall correctly, it's from a reg key. And that reg key, it's a contained statement more than anything. So when we look at, where were we, antivirus, customized risk indicators. So Windows Defender actually registers itself in a number of places with version identifiers and a number of other things. We're just looking for that Windows Defender. If you wanted to put something like Norton in, you may get away with that, or McAfee. It is where I spell it wrong, isn't it? I can never remember. Something along those lines. So it's going to look for those indicators across installed software, reg keys, and if it finds that, it will deem it to have to be on there. Now, there could be a false positive because obviously McAfee make firewalls, they make a number of other things. So it would need to be monitored and looked at to ensure compliance in those particular spaces.
Excellent, thank you. Sort of everything you showed today, Mark, all the capabilities and the reports. Any agents have to be installed on servers to pull all that together?
No, we're completely agentless with this. We do, I mean, from a best practice standpoint, I would suggest that you always look to install the compression service when you set up a monitoring plan. Something that I know, I can't remember who's doing the monitoring plan one. I think it was Tiffany. Who I'm sure she'll touch on when she goes through that, through this webinar series. But short answer, no, there's no agents required. We basically reach out and grab this information from a number of locations through WMI, through event logs, through you know, stuff that is outwardly available from a Windows-based device or a device that we can support and monitor.
Yep. There's actually one I can answer. Somebody asked a question about a licensing model for SharePoint. It's primarily per user. Certainly you can contact your account rep or preferred partner to get more details on that, but we generally do most things on a per user basis. There's a question that I'm going to have somebody reach out to just from an upgrade from 9.9 to 9.9.5. I will have someone reach out to you, Rebecca. There's a question on what is the cost for the risk assessment license. So risk assessment is just a feature within the product. You want to say something there, Mark?
No, I was just going to say zero.
Yeah.
It's nothing. It's already there.
Yep. So just included a core feature within Netwrix Auditor. Obviously, Mark covered off the modules that light up the different areas, but that's just a part of the product that you get with Netwrix Auditor. And then I think we have one more. And this looks more like, Richard, I'm going to ask somebody to reach out to you because that sounds like it may be something specific to your environment. So I will do that. And then question on reports and audits for AD and Azure AD group memberships. For example, reviewing what a manager's direct reports have access to, both common and uncommon groups. And we can do that, we just don't do it here within risk assessment.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep,
we can do that, and that'll be covered off, I'm sure, through our search, alerting, and behavioural anomaly insights that will come in the next sessions.
Yep. And there's a question around Office 365 Exchange Online mailboxes. We will follow up with you. I have to get actually an update from the product guys on when they may be adding some of those things into risk assessment. I think we are about out of time. There are a number of other questions, and this is great. So we have quite a bit of homework to do to follow up with you, but I also want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we're going to switch forward and just cover off the schedule for the remaining sessions. So if you want to throw that slide up really quick, Mark. But if we did not get to your question on this session, we will follow up and get an answer to you promptly. So I appreciate all the questions coming in. I want to thank you, Mark, for doing a great job walking us through that. And we didn't get to the guitar, but maybe next time.
Maybe.
And want to thank everybody for carving out time from their day today. I hope this was more valuable than you thought it was going to be when you joined, but at least as valuable. And it hit on what you were looking to learn. Next week, we're going to be covering search, which is a really powerful set of capabilities within Netwrix Auditor. So I hope to see everyone on there. Thank everyone again for their time. We'll look forward to seeing you again. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.